Would Father Casey please step forward for the invocation? Let us pray. God, our Father, we ask your blessing upon us today as we remember and honor our servicemen and women that died in Vietnam. We honor and remember also all those men and women who have lost their lives safeguarding our freedoms and assuring peace throughout the world. As we honor these brave soldiers who gave their life for our country and this community, we pledge never to forget, and we promise to do all in our power to promote peace throughout the world. We are mindful today, Lord, of all those men and women serving here in our country and around the world in harm's way. We ask you, Lord, to watch over them, protect them, and bring them safely home. As we gather today, let our prayer be one of peace for our world, our country, our community, and our homes, and above all, for peace in our hearts. We ask this in God's name. Amen. Thank you, Father. Joining us today to sing the national anthem, Tommy Lenahan. Tommy.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light was so proudly we stand at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight over ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets red glad, longboats bursting in air, gave through to the night that our flag
Thank you, Tom. Sir, will you kindly move so we can start the program? Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated. "38 years ago, we had a beautiful day, and we have another one again today. So thank you to the 25 guys who are looking down upon us. It would be tempting to stand before you today and say that more than 38 years ago, when Harry Carroll, Tommy Irwin, Jerry Turner, Georgie Egan, and I dared to think about creating a memorial to the friends and neighbors we lost in Vietnam, we always knew it would lead to a moment like this. Yes, it would be very tempting, but it wouldn't be true. How could we have known all those years ago that a simple stone adorned with the names of 25 South Boston sons would spark a change in the way this country viewed the courage and sacrifice of all its veterans? The answer is, we didn't. Indeed, from the very first moment this stone was unveiled on Sunday morning, the 13th of September, 1981, South Boston embraced this spot as a hallowed ground. And on that morning, when we first marched so proudly into this park, what people far beyond East Broadway saw in the gracious sunlight of that moment was the deepest expression of our love, our devotion, our loyalty, our pride. All that we had tried to do, everything this moment is about, can be summed up in a single word: remember. It is both humbling and wonderful to think that we have kept the memory of friends alive in our hearts longer than they were with us. In this way, they have truly become immortal. And we have kept the faith. And that faith that's helped to nurture us, the kids who were lucky enough to have made it home. When I look back across the full generation of remembrance, all the Sundays we've gathered here to give life, truth to those words carved across the base of that stone, to provide that their deaths, to prove that their deaths were not in vain, I am struck by what this memorial has meant to us. If the South Boston Vietnam Memorial has become a touchstone for this community, it has also been an anchor to the lives of those of us who never failed to return. It has provided solace, grounded us in the love of friends, and connected us in ways I could never have dreamt 38 years ago. Through the simple act of remembering, we have drawn so many others to the sacred circle, formed lasting friendships with people who saw the reflection of their youth, their own neighborhood, and their own service in what we created here. When 200 Vietnam veterans dressed in suits, wearing red carnations, marched up East Broadway, it was viewed as a rather strange and bold gesture 38 years ago. To say the least, that was not the stereotype of the Vietnam veteran. On that morning, the nation came to see South Boston Vietnam veterans in a different light, a light of honor. And we had a message to anyone who would listen, that Vietnam veterans were honored to serve their country, proud of their service in Vietnam, and we would never apologize for that service. In the time, however, the humanity we showed on that first glorious Sunday would be replicated on the sacred and hallowed ground of the Washington Mall, and then in thousands of neighborhood memorials across the country. What the rest of the country had come to see is what South Boston never forgot. Before they went off to serve their country, to fight and die in place halfway around the world, they were the kids we played ball with, the kids we went to school with, laughed with, fought with, hung out on the corner with. They were us. Today, in the reflection of that stone, we see ourselves, older, grayer, hopefully a little wiser, but we also see them smiling back, forever young, forever as we remember them.
All memorials tend to burnish with time. Memories can grow thin as the loved ones who cherish them pass on. What we could not have imagined 38 years ago, perhaps what we did not imagine 38 years ago, is that our memorial would become more relevant with each passing year, thanks to all of you who are here today, who cared enough to remember. On behalf of the South Boston Vietnam Memorial Committee, and most importantly, on behalf of the South Boston Vietnam veterans, I want to thank you for keeping a very special faith, for joining us today, and for continuing standing by the families for whom we mourn with and celebrate. For as solemn as this moment is, it is also most certainly a celebration of 25 noble lives, 25 sons, brothers, and friends. And always remembering, we will always be celebrating their memory as we hear the echo of their laughter, and once again know the joy of their spirit. Thank you. In 38 years, it doesn't get any easier. Our guest speaker today, General John F. Kelly. I asked the general, who has a pretty lengthy bio, how much of it he wanted read. He said, little or none, which is true John Kelly fashion. But just let me touch on a couple of things. General Kelly was born in Boston, enlisted in the Marine Corps in 1970, and was discharged as a sergeant in 1972. He graduated from University of Massachusetts in 1976 and was commissioned a second lieutenant in the United States Marine Corps. General Kelly certainly has had a distinguished career. In 2012, having been nominated by the President and confirmed by the U.S. Senate for the promotion to general, he took command of the United States Southern Command in Miami, where General Kelly retired in January of 2016. On January 20th, 2017, having been previously confirmed by the U.S. Senate for the position, he assumed duties as the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security. On July 31st, 2017, Secretary Kelly was asked by the President to assume the duties of the White House Chief of Staff, a position he held until January 2019. Long before General Kelly heard the words Semper Fidelis, before he stepped on the yellow footprints on Parris Island, he was lucky enough to grow up in the city of Boston neighborhood called Oak Square in Brighton, where the core values of family, faith, loyalty, and pride were instilled at a very young age and last a lifetime. Boston is so proud of the Boston Marines, particularly those Marines that have gone on to achieve the title General. We take great pride knowing that General Kelly has joined a distinguished group of retired Marine generals, General P.X. Kelly, General Joe Hoare, General Jack Sheehan, General Butch Neal, and in 15 days, General Joe Dunford. As a former Marine corporal, I take pride knowing that I can call all the Boston generals a friend. But with Kelly, we share something special. We both graduated from Parris Island. Ladies and gentlemen, our guest speaker, General John F. Kelly, United States Marine Corps, retired.
Thanks very much. Just very briefly, you know I'm from Boston. My dad grew up in Boston, Irish guy, as the last name would indicate. My mother, Italian, Pedalino from East Boston. The best deal in life is if you have an Italian mother. I will tell you that, and many of you know that, because with all due respect to the Irish side, they don't cook nearly as well. Anyways, a couple of quick stories, and it's all about these gentlemen. It's all about the Vietnam War. But my dad, working man his whole life, 2 jobs, 46 years working for the post office and the old Railway Express in South Boston. He was drafted to go into World War II, the first peacetime draft our country had, and he was stationed, believe it or not, after boot camp in Camp Edwards, Massachusetts. And so he did his year, and then he was extended for a year, which didn't, please him. This is before the war now, and he, as he told the story to me many, many times, he came home to Brighton over the weekend, one weekend, then get on the train, get on the bus, going back to the barracks, and somewhere in there, the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. So he gets to the barracks, and of course all the men are listening to the coverage of the Pearl Harbor attack and all, and he was outraged like every American was at the time, and probably still are. But in any event, he then goes to his first sergeant, and he said, this is all terrible and everything, but this isn't getting in the way of my discharge, is it? And he said, he's a guy from the South, he said, Kelly, have you ever heard, well, it did get in the way. He shipped out overseas and was overseas for 5 years. Uncle Leo had a deferment. Uncle Leo was with the railroad and had a deferment until 1943. And he used to write my father, who was in Guadalcanal and places like that fighting, and give him a hard time about how he was making, $400 a month, and my father was making, $25 a month. And then he gets his draft notice, goes to the same place here in the city that I took my draft physical in 1970. He gets his draft notice, and he comes out of the draft thing, and there was a Marine recruiter standing there. And he was saying to all of the people that had just passed their draft notice, we're about to invade Europe. Normandy hadn't happened yet. We're about to invade Europe. And it's going to be really bad. So why don't you join the Marines? Now, somehow my Uncle Leo had missed, Guadalcanal, Tarawa, that kind of thing. So he did join with a guy by the name of Bobby Crane, former treasurer. They were best friends for life, and they served together on Iwo Jima. And his baby brother was in the United States Navy on destroyer duty out of the city. The point of all of that is, when I grew up in this great city, and it is the greatest city, when I grew up in this great city, every man in my life was a veteran. Everybody. Of either some World War I, but mostly World War II and a few from Korea. Every man in my life was a veteran. And every time they got together, which was frequent, they were all working men, every time they got together, they talked about the war, they talked about their buddies, in the times they had. They didn't talk about the fighting and the horrible things. It was always about silly, stupid little things until they started to talk about guys like that. And then they'd get quiet, and that'd be the end of the conversation. Every man in my life. So when the Vietnam War started, which is typical of wars, the politicians, with all due respect to the people back then, this was a great thing to do, fight in Vietnam, stop the communists and all that. And somewhere between that initial conversation and about 1968, politicians lost interest in the war. And American society lost interest in the war. Guys like that were still receiving their draft notice, guys like me receiving their draft notice, and they still stepped forward. I took my draft physical in the same place that my 3 uncles, my father and 2 uncles did on the Irish side, and 5 uncles on the Italian side did. And at the end of it, I can remember the medical guy telling me, he didn't say my name, but he said, I think you have bone spurs. I don't think you're eligible for the draft. And your eyes are not particularly good. Real bad eyesight back then. And I begged this guy not to put it on the paper. And so he didn't, and here I am. But there was never a question in my house, in my neighborhood, in this neighborhood, about serving one's country. Never. And when they got the call, they went. And even though the country lost interest and the politicians lost interest, guys like that kept going. kept walking forward. And it's no different today. I loved it, and I will end. I'm not going to talk long. I will end with this. The men and women that I served with in my 45 years in the United States Marine Corps were just like these guys. They were no different. And as I oftentimes tell people, I never met people like these people, never. But I know exactly who they are, and I know them very, very well because I served my entire life with people like that. Selfless devotion to duty, protect the country. I don't want to get ahead if my unit doesn't get ahead. I don't want to get ahead if the mission's not accomplished. They get paid nothing. They serve constantly. They're the reason why we can sit here today on a beautiful day and why we have this great democracy that we have. It's people like that. 25 of them. A tiny percentage, obviously, of the 42 million men and women who have served our country. And it's since we became a republic. 1 million of them have paid the ultimate sacrifice. And in my many, 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 and some with Tommy Lyons, in my many visits to the hospitals during the war, and seeing these young men and women banged up, lost legs, lost arms, lost faces, in my conversations with their families, it was always the same question: was it worth it? Is their sacrifice in vain? As the words are on the memorial. And the dozens and dozens and dozens of funerals I went to at Arlington Cemetery and other places, it was always the same question: did they die in vain? Was it worth it? And I had an opportunity to answer that question in my mind at my son's funeral. And it's the same answer that these guys would give if they could. And the same answer, I believe, 1 million Americans would give if they had survived. It is to serve my country and the cloth of my country, the uniform of my country. It was worth it. And it came to me at my own son's gravesite that the question really isn't ours to ask or answer. It's impossible for us to answer it. The answer, they gave it with their lives. That they were where they wanted to be, serving with the best men and women on the planet, their buddies, when they gave their lives. They didn't want to give their lives, but if they were alive, or if we could ask them the question, they would say, for America, you're damn right it's worth it. Thanks very much. Semper Fidelis.
Thank you, General. It's my pleasure now to introduce the mayor of the city of Boston. He's the custodian of this beautiful park and has been a partner with us since he took office. What you see here on a regular basis is because of the support that we get from Mayor Walsh here at Medal of Honor Park. So, Mr. Mayor, please join us.
Thank you very much, Tommy, and to Governor Baker, Congressman Lynch, to our keynote speaker, General Kelly, all the elected officials that are here, State Senator Nick Collins, State Representative David Beal, City Councilor Michael Flaherty, Ed Flynn, Anissa Sabi George, to Father Casey, to our Veterans Commission in the City of Boston, Rob Santiago, to all our veterans, I want to say thank you, Vietnam veterans and all of our other veterans that are here with us today, to our active service men and women, to our Gold Star families, and all the community members joining us today. Thank you for being here today. We are proud to gather here for the 38th anniversary of the South Boston Vietnam Memorial in this beautiful Medal of Honor Park. This memorial, as you heard, was started by Tommy and his friends who are here today to pay respects to the friends they lost in Vietnam. Since then, it's become a place of healing, reflection, and gratitude for so many people in this community, in the entire city of Boston. We gather here year after year to remember and honor the service of 25 brave men from South Boston, maybe 25 brave boys from South Boston. Each and every one of them paid the ultimate sacrifice for our freedoms in a land far from Southie. It's a tremendous loss to this community that the community still feels today. And this morning we continue to stand in awe of their commitment to our city, our country, and our freedoms. It's important to state, as a city, we are committed to the legacy of service that runs through all of our neighborhoods. Right now, we are rededicating our hero squares all across the city of Boston. Hero squares are found at the intersections of streets that many of us walk down every single day. Each square represents a person, a resident, a hero. Led by our Veteran Service Commission, we are upgrading our Hero Square signs with the biographical information on our fallen heroes. So it's just not a name on the top of a signpost. It's going to tell you a story about that person on the top of a signpost. It's one special way that we can continue to keep their legacy alive for years to come, no matter how many years ago they served our country. We must always remember that even in our busy lives, we always have a moment to stop and reflect on what it means to be free, and that the cost it took to make that freedom possible. That's what you think about when you come to this memorial. It's a humbling and moving experience. As Americans, we are united by our gratitude for our fallen heroes, the men and women who continue to serve our country at this very moment. We know whatever happens in our future, and however divided we may be as a nation, we will always honor, and we should always honor and respect our veterans. Nothing will ever change that. God bless all of you. God bless the men that's on this wall, and God bless America.
We've just taken a minute to move the colored guards and put them in a place where they're not standing in the shade for the next half hour, 45 minutes. So we'll just take a brief pause. It's my pleasure now to introduce our Congressman Steven Lynch, who has been at this ceremony both as a state rep, a state senator, and as our congressman. He's been always a true friend. Ladies and gentlemen, Congressman Lynch.
Good afternoon, everyone. Great to be with you all. Our guest of honor, my friend John Kelly, longtime friend. Governor Baker, Mayor Walsh, Ambassador Ray Flynn is out there somewhere. My colleagues in government, Senator Collins, Representative Beal, Councilor at Large, Mike Flaherty, District Councilor, Ed Flynn, and at Large Councilor Anissa Sabi George. Welcome. Reverend Casey, thank you for your blessing. Although I have to say, after Mass this morning, that was rather an extensive sermon that you gave today. as you were describing in great detail how the prodigal son returned and received a new robe and a ring and slippers, and they killed the fatted calf, I pondered whether or not the prodigal son realized that the Patriots were on at 1 o'clock. That was a Monday night football sermon, Father. That was like if they're on tomorrow night. Holy cow! But oddly enough, part of my remarks this morning are really what Father touched on this morning. Father was talking about people who are lost, obviously referring to the prodigal son, but he also said we should observe how extensively our country seeks to return our sons who are missing in action. So last week I had an opportunity to spend a couple of days with about 2,500 Marines in Darwin, Australia. And on the way back, we stopped at the DPAA, which is the Defense POWMIA Accounting Agency. And what their responsibility is, and I've spoken about this before at this event, is their sole responsibility on your behalf, they are paid by the taxpayer, you pay them, is to recover the remains of the 87,000 sons and daughters of this country who perished in the Second World War. The 5,000 or so that are still remaining on North Korean soil who perished in the Korean War, and about 1,000 Americans who remain in Vietnam and in Laos as a result of the Vietnam War. And it just so happened I was there at a very propitious moment. We recently had returned 40 World War II missing in action soldiers and Marines from Tarawa, as General Kelly mentioned. The Battle of Tarawa is a little spit of land. There's not much there. It's not even an island. It's an atoll. But back in World War II, back in 1943, it actually had a landing strip on it, so it became a strategic location. And there was a massive battle there. And these 40 soldiers and Marines perished on that atoll. And unbeknownst to us, the local islanders who were supporting us and had been persecuted really by the occupying force of Japanese, buried these sons of the United States in unmarked graves, only recently recovered. Those were returned to the DPAA at Hickam Field, right near Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. And because of the fact that at that time in World War II, we did an X-ray of each and every soldier, every single enlisted person at that time did an X-ray. They have been identified now and are being identified by their breast. It's called a clavicle analysis. They can actually identify. They say it's as good as a thumbprint. And so each and every one of those 40 will be returned to their home communities and to their families over the next several months. We also received, because of the work that has been done with Korea over the last year or so, we received 50 boxes of remains from in and around the Chosin Reservoir. Those were recently received at Hickam Field as well. And in those, what we thought were the remains of 50 Americans, upon analysis, there were the remains of 250 individuals. 80 of those turned out to be Korean combatants, but 170 of U.S. Marines and Army from the east and west ends of the Chosin Reservoir. And this year, they set a record in terms of recovery from Vietnam. 208 of our sons, of the colleagues of the men standing here at the rail, were also identified and are being returned to their families. So at Hickam Air Force Base, where they have about 40 forensic pathologists, anthropologists, archaeologists in this effort, they notify the families. And they invite them to welcome the return of our sons. But in many cases, the families want to go to Hickam Air Force Base and pay their respects and join the returnees on that trip home. And there was one story that Admiral Kreitz, who runs this whole operation on behalf of the United States Navy, he told me of the whole process. And it was a Vietnam veteran. He had died 6 months before his daughter was born. His wife and his daughter, his wife was now in her 80s, and his daughter, who was now early 50s, asked to come to Hickam. And the DPA actually gives the opportunity to the family to review the remains. And this family, the mother and the daughter, asked for that option. Now, they have grief counselors there, and as you could imagine, it's a traumatic experience for a lot of these families. And with this one mother and her daughter, before they have a room set up, it's very respectful, dignified. As they were bringing in the mother and the daughter to view the remains of their husband and father, the daughter paused. And she said to Admiral Kreitz, "I'm not sure I can do this." And Admiral Kreitz said, it's entirely understandable. It's entirely, under the circumstances, it's entirely understandable. You don't have to do this. And the daughter said, "No, you don't understand, General. I'm 52 years old, and I'm about to meet my father for the first time." She said, "That's what gives me hesitation." That statement, to me, hit me in the heart. And it epitomizes what Gold Star families have given to this country. It really plumbs the depth of the sacrifice that they have made on behalf of all of us. So to all the Gold Star families that are here today, for the 25 men on this wall, for General Kelly's son, we say thank you. Nothing can ever repay the sacrifice that you have rendered on behalf of this country. God bless our Gold Star families, and God bless these United States of America. Thank you.
It's my pleasure now to introduce Governor Baker, who, once again, is joining us, and I've been saying this every time that he's here, that he's the first and only governor to ever grace us with his presence. So once again, Governor Baker.
So good afternoon. I just want to start by saying to Tom Lyons that usually when I come to this event, I speak before the mayor and the congressman. I don't know if I want to come back and speak after the congressman again, because truthfully, there's really not much that can be said on the heels of that story that Congressman Lynch told. But as I listened to Tom speak, and I listened to the general, our honored guest, and and Mayor Walsh, and I do want to thank once again the other elected officials, all of whom I've seen at this event every time I've come, Senator Collins and Representative Beal and Councilor at Large Flaherty and Councilor Flynn and Councilor at Large Asabi George, and especially to the men on the railing here. I do believe that this piece of stone was the beginning of a big change in the debate and the discussion in the aftermath of Vietnam. Now, there was a book that was written by a journalist and an author named Myra McPherson that was published in the mid-1980s called Long Time Passing. It was about the Vietnam War. And I'm probably going to butcher this expression, but it was something along the lines of, above all, the Vietnam War asked everything of a few and nothing of most in America. Everything of few and nothing of most. And yet when those men came home, following up on General Kelly's comments, they were either ignored or demeaned for their service. Now, since then, I've had a chance to witness firsthand what I think of as the greatest lesson of Vietnam, which is the ability of people in this good country, the good people in this good country, to separate the war from the warrior. And I saw this for the first time in my hometown of Swampscott when we suffered the first casualty in the war in Iraq. Jared Raymond, Specialist Jared Raymond. Now, I knew that most people in Swampscott were not big fans of the war in Iraq. And I worried as I walked out the door of my house to go to his service how the town would respond. And I turned the corner to head up the street to St. John's Church. And literally everyone who lives in Swampscott was there. Everyone. And as the procession from the church to the cemetery took place, both sides of the street were filled. 2, 3, 4, 5 deep. Everybody had a flag. People made a big statement that day about Jared's service, irrespective of what they thought about the conflict. And then several years later, I took my wife and my kids to a concert. And right in the middle of the concert, one of the band members told everybody to get quiet, so everybody got nuts. And he said, "No, I mean it, quiet." And he said, "I want you all to sit down. But I want you," and he pointed out into the crowd, and he said, "I want you to stand, the guy in the uniform." And he said, "I really hope you and all your buddies come home safe. But thank you, thank you, thank you for your service to our country." And then most recently, I went out to greet, it's the worst part of this job, I went out to greet a young man who came home for the last time at Westover Air Force Base. Green Beret, was killed in Afghanistan. I met his family at the hangar. As we left in Western Mass, the streets were lined deep from the base all the way to the funeral home. It wasn't an organized parade. It's just a whole bunch of people who felt terrible about what happened to this young man who came out to pay their respects to him and his family. So to all of you and to these gentlemen and their families, and to all those who I believe served in that war, the pain you suffered, the greeting you didn't get, people learned. And I do believe there was a tremendous sense of sorrow and missed opportunity. And not only will people never forget these 25 or the million that General Kelly talked about, but they will never forget how important it is to honor, respect, and show gratitude and grace and kindness to the men and women who wear that uniform and stand up for the rest of us and make it possible for us to live in this free democracy. God bless them all. Thank you.
Thank you, Governor Baker. I won't make the mistake next year. Just so folks know, the South Boston delegation, who are with us every year, has asked Congressman Lynch to speak on their behalf. So certainly to our delegation, gentlemen, thank you. Thank you for being here and always being with us. And now we will have our two families lay the wreath on behalf of the 25. Okay, I would like to have someone from the Sullivan family. I know the Sullivan family is here to step forward. And do we have another Gold Star family present? I'm sorry, I can't see anybody present. Danny Joyce. Okay, Danny, thank you. No, you don't. No. No, you did. Thank you. Representing the South Boston Vietnam veterans, Jody Conley and Peter Finnegan. Thank you, gentlemen. And I'd ask General John Kelly to please present the wreath on behalf of all those Gold Star families not only here today, but throughout the country. Thank you, John. It's my honor now to read the South Boston Vietnam Honor Roll. Agri, Lance Corporal, United States Marine Corps. Bazzanati, First Lieutenant, United States Army. Borvik, Richard, Specialist 4th, United States Army. Calhoun, John C., Lance Corporal, United States Marine Corps. Cole, John Henry, PFC, United States Marine Corps. Daly, Paul M., Specialist 6th Class, United States Army. Del Verde, Ronald L., PFC, United States Marine Corps. Desmond, Joseph F., PFC, United States Marine Corps. Dunn, Joseph F., PFC, United States Marine Corps. Edmund, Devon, Sergeant, United States Army. Grover, Gene D., Staff Sergeant, United States Marine Corps. Ubisac, Frank, PFC, United States Army. Eitri, Douglas J., Specialist 5th Class, United States Army. Jacobs, John P., Corporal, United States Marine Corps. Joyce, John G., Corporal, United States Army. Myland, Edward W., Sergeant, United States Air Force. O'Toole, James, PFC, United States Army. Peterson, Burton, Lance Corporal, United States Marine Corps. Sheehan, Paul H., First Sergeant, United States Marine Corps. Stewart, James J., PFC, United States Marine Corps. Stone, Edward, PFC, United States Marine Corps. Sullivan, Edward M., PFC, United States Marine Corps. Thomas, Joseph E., PFC, United States Marine Corps. Turner, Donald J., Lance Corporal, United States Marine Corps. Wheeler, James K., Specialist 6th Class, United States Army. And in the service of their country, Lance Corporal Daniel R. Powers, United States Marine Corps. Sergeant Nicholas Buddy Sanchez, United States Air Force. Thank you. Please take a seat. I'd like to acknowledge and thank the United States Army, United States Marine Corps, and the United States Navy Color Guards for being here today. Thank you, gentlemen, and thank you for your service. We do that. Also, I want to take the opportunity to thank Dave Matteo and David Winnick for their kind donation. As you can see, we have gone from having to cut, rake, and mow the grass, and now we vacuum clean it. But thanks to so many people, we've been able to make this a whole lot easier for our ground crew under the leadership of Bob Lenahan. That are getting older, but now I think we have a great opportunity to maintain this and keep it beautiful as it should be. So thank you to Dave and David. And lastly to Commissioner Ryan Woods from the Parks Department, who once again was so helpful in making today happen. If you forget my death, then I died in vain. These words do not speak about bravery or valor, duty or honor. And in fact, they do not speak to the dead or about them. They speak to us, the living. For it is us who have been charged with the awesome responsibility of giving meaning and, yes, even life to the ultimate sacrifice they made on our behalf. If we, the family, the friends, and the veterans they left behind do not take the time or make the commitment to remember, then their deaths indeed will have been in vain. We must continue to remember their service, their sacrifice, and never forget. And once again, thank you all for being here, 38 years and counting. Please clear the center walk so we can retire the colors. And lastly, please give a great round of applause to the Greater Boston Firefighter Pipes and Drums, who once again always do an amazing job, and they're here every year. So thank you, gentlemen. Thank you all. Have a great day, ladies and gentlemen.